Today we talk about electronic voting, so voting on the internet, and we'll talk about the security analysis we conducted on the system used for the French legislative election in 2022. So first, some context. So during this election, more than 1.5 million of voters were expected to choose 11 deputies, and they cast more than 500,000 of ballots. So this one was the largest election in the world, so we wanted to be sure that the protocol was secure, or at least was secure enough regarding the expected security. So to do the security analysis, the first step we had to do is to define the different roles in the system. So here this is as usual, so we have a voter, we have a voting client that is using a laptop, and the voting client is just a JavaScript running in his browser. There is a voting server collecting all the ballots, and the voting server runs some Java code provided by the vendor, and the voting server is administrated by the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs, because it is a political election. And we have some decryption trustees that share the decryption key of the election to improve the privacy. And finally, we have some third party that is an honest agent in the system, and that is this role is played by some independent researchers. So this is good. We have the different roles, and then if you want to conduct the security analysis, we need to know how the protocol runs. So what is its workflow? But unfortunately, all the public documentation was too lacuna to do this. So this leads to the first contribution we had. That was reversing the JavaScript voting client to be able to obtain a comprehensive specification of the system. Based on this, we did our security analysis, and we discovered different attacks. And we discovered that the system fails to ensure both verifiability and vote secrecy. And finally, we proposed some fixes, and we tried to take a step back to draw some lessons to help for the organization of future election. Okay, so first, let's talk about the workflow. So assume we have a voter who wants to vote for a candidate V. So the voter will just enter his choice in the voting client. The voting client will create a ballot, an electronic ballot, and send it to the voting server. So this ballot is just typically an encryption of the vote together with some proofs. And the encryption is just used to provide ballot privacy. So when receiving a ballot, the voting server put it in a ballot box. So something important here is that there is one ballot box per consular, so one ballot box per city typically. And after this, the voting server just sends back to the voting client a receipt that is just a fingerprint and the signature of the fingerprint. And the voting client is expected to check that the fingerprint he received from the voting server corresponds to the ballot he cast before. If this is the case, the voting client displays the receipt to the voter, and the voter stores this value. At the end of the election, the decryption trustees collect all the ballots in the different ballot boxes, and then they decrypt them to publish the results. And the third party checks that all the computations that have been computed are correct. And the third party also provides another service to the voter, which consists in collecting the different receipts the voter stored during the voting phase, and use them to check that they correspond to ballot included in the ballot box. Okay, so the receipt is just used to ensure the verifiability of the system. So this is the workflow of the system, and based on this, we can almost do the security analysis. The last thing that is needed is to define the threat model we consider. So we want the system is expected to provide both secrecy and verifiability under a quite standard threat model, meaning that for ballot privacy, the attacker can compromise either the voting server or the communication channel between the server and the voter. And for verifiability, the attacker can also corrupt the decryption trustees, as expected. So this is this is the usual threat model. Just one note is that unlike what is done in the literature, here we assume that the voting device is trusted. So this is a quite strong assumption, but this is an assumption that is acknowledged, that is publicly acknowledged by the authorities. So, okay, so we accept it. Okay, so the first attack I just want to show you. So this is just the intuition of the attack. If you want the details, they are in the papers. So this is an attack against the verifiability of the system. So the attacker will manage to modify the outcome of the election. So this is the honest flow of the system. We just have a compromised voting server. So here, this is the flow I just presented before. But if you have a look to the JavaScript program, in fact, the voting client does not receive one receipt, but it receives 4 receipts. And because there is a bug, the voting client checks only the consistency of 2 of them. So there are 2 that are not checked. And unfortunately, what we noticed is that the receipt that is displayed to the voter is the receipt whose consistency is not verified by the voting client. And based on this, you can immediately imagine the attack. The voting server can just create a fake ballot, so it is a ballot in red, send the receipt, the 2 honest receipts to pass the consistency test, and send 2 receipts corresponding to this new ballot. And the voter will store the receipt corresponding to the ballot added in the ballot box. So at the end, the voter can use the service provided by the third party, and nothing will be detected. Okay. So the impact of this attack is that the attacker can modify the outcome of the election just by replacing any ballot or just by dropping ballots if you want to just drop ballots. Okay, so this is the first quite simple attack against verifiability. And this is not finished because we have also discovered that there is an attack against privacy. So the attack against privacy is not an attack against based on an implementation bug, but it's an attack that relies on a design vulnerability, and vulnerability at the design level of the protocol. And the vulnerability we discovered is that ballots are not correctly bound to the ballot box, because I said that there are different ballot boxes, one per city. And because the ballots are not correctly bound to the ballot box, the attacker will be able to move a ballot from a ballot box to another. And doing so, you can break the privacy. So to illustrate this attack, let's consider this scenario. So we have 2 consulars, so 2 cities, Sydney in which there are many voters, and Minsk in which there are only a few voters. So this existed in practice during the election. And assume that in Sydney there is a target voter, so the attacker wants to learn the vote of the green voter. So the attack is very simple. So when the target voter sends his ballot, the voting server can just put his ballot in Minsk ballot box and adapt the receipt according to this modification to not be detected. And when the few voters in Minsk consular cast a ballot, the attacker can just exploit the first vulnerability to modify this ballot by new ones for which he knows the plain text. At the end, because the results are published at the consular level, the attacker just have to look at the result, and the attacker will immediately learn the plain text of the target voter's ballot. So this is this attack exploits the first vulnerability, but we can do this attack without exploiting the first vulnerability, but it's slightly more complex. So it's just described in the paper. So the consequence is that the attacker can learn some target voters' votes, so typically 1 per small consular. And something interesting is that this vulnerability can also be exploited to perform some remote coercion attacks. So typically, the coercer can put all the ballots of the coerced voter in the same ballot box and check whether the voters followed the coercion. So these are the two main attacks we discovered, but there are other variants. And we disclose these attacks to the different stakeholders, and we propose different fixes. So the fixes are quite intuitive, and we were quite happy to see that almost all of them have been implemented for the election that have been organized in this year in 2023. Okay, so this was for the security analysis, and based on this, we tried to take a step back on this story, because what we studied is the implementation of a protocol, of the FLEP protocol, that is vulnerable of attacks. And what's interesting is that this system claimed to be derived from a state-of-the-art protocol, Belenios, that is affected by none of the attack. So the question was, how can this happen? How can we start from a system that is secure, that can be used, that could be used in practice, but when we try to use it, we obtain a system with a lot of flaws. So we identified, the first reason we identified is that almost all the state-of-the-art solutions cannot be used in practice immediately, because either they lack some features or they rely on particular features. So typically, the first item I put it, the necessity to define multiple ballot boxes to publish the result at the city level, typically, is always omitted in the state-of-the-art solutions. And we derive and adapting the system to model multi-ballot box, introduce attacks in this system, but also in other systems, typically in Switzerland last year. So the first recommendation we can do is to push academic researchers to take into account all the operational constraints when they propose and design a new system. And this is interesting because it opens new research questions. Typically, how can we guarantee, how can we ensure voter authentication with practical solution is still an open question. And the second reason we found is about the implementation and the deployment of the protocol. We all know that it's a difficult task. So what we can, the first thing that is quite intuitive is just to push for transparency and openness, exactly as it's done in Switzerland, typically. In France, the partial publication was published just 1 month before the election, so it was too late. And the second point is to identify the most critical components of the system, because when we talked with the different stakeholders, I consider that the most critical component is the server, as usual on the internet. But for this system, for elections, the server is not the most critical component, but it was the voting client. So it's important to identify which components, on which component we should spend time to detect vulnerabilities. And one solution to do this is just to keep in mind that any component that needs to be trusted in the system is a critical component. This is quite simple, but it was not considered by the vendor. So we'll stop there. For sure, there are more details about the attacks and the lessons we learn in the papers, and if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you.